Like any of the greatest films ever made, there was a special magic captured in Maximum Overdrive, with the explosions, blood spraying on hot gleaming chrome, the inexplicable doom of humanity, the survivors of the Dixie Boy, and the only movie score AC/DC ever composed. What idea is more terrifying than every machine in existence gaining sentience just to murder you? Of all the stories of his that he could have chosen for his directorial debut, Stephen King chose Trucks, which means this particular story must have meant something special to him. Also, it must have been especially meaningful considering it is one of the very few of his stories that do not take place in Maine. King still makes a nod to his home state in the scene where the pizza delivery car is crashed into a tree. You'll see that the license plate is from Maine. Trucks is a short story first published in the June 1973 issue of Cavalier magazine, written by a then unknown Stephen King, and later included in his 1978 collection Night Shift. In the early 80s, a British filmmaker, Milton Subotsky, had purchased the film rights to several stories from Stephen King's Night Shift collection. King, however, wasn't a big fan of Milton Subotsky. King referred to Subotsky as the Hubert Humphrey of horror, and someone who thinks all horror pictures should somehow be uplifting. The plan was to package Trucks with The Lawnmower Man and The Mangler to create an anthology of 3 unrelated King stories called The Machines. Subotsky moved forward with this idea to the point that he even had a script drafted by screenwriters Edward and Valerie Abraham. Ultimately, however, he was unable to secure financing. As a result, and because he was in the midst of an unrelated lawsuit, Subotsky sold the rights to Dino De Laurentiis. When De Laurentiis first acquired the property, he asked King to write the screenplay. King originally declined. De Laurentiis and producer Martha Schumacher approached him again a few weeks later and asked him to write a script. "I really didn't want to do it. I didn't have the time to do it," King recalls. But the thing with Dino is that he's almost telepathic. He knows when the ideas have started to sink in. I had suggested another writer for the treatment, and frankly, neither one of us liked what he had come up with. I had been kicking around some ideas, this idea about the comet and all the machinery going crazy, not just the trucks like in the original story. Therefore, Dino called a week later and asked me one more time to do the screenplay. I immediately said yes, because by then I had a very clear picture of the plot and found myself wanting to go ahead with the adaptation. King's ideas were so clear that he specified more than 1,000 shots within the screenplay. De Laurentiis' response was to ask him to direct. Again, King declined and De Laurentiis insisted. According to producer Martha Schumacher, Stephen later said to Dino, "I want to direct." And Dino said to Stephen, "Why not? You should."
I think Dino De Laurentiis probably had 2 reasons for that. One of them is that he's sort of a magnificent gambler at heart. He's the last of the true entrepreneurs. He will roll the dice. And he thinks to himself, well, Stephen King has written a lot of books that have enough cinematic appeal so they've been bought for films. Maybe he can do it.
And then Stephen, not being frustrated, but obviously he writes a screenplay or he writes a book, but how it's executed ultimately on the screen, he thought, why, I write this, why can't I just flesh out my hand of obviously bring it to the screen? And Dino said, "Why don't you direct?" And Stephen said, "Why don't I direct?" As if it was, just the next step in progression. And with that, we got excited, and he was excited too. It was a big, big step for him.
King would only direct on the condition that if any point during filming De Laurentiis felt the footage, which was checked daily, was no good, he would tell King and replace him with another director. This was a promise that would soon be broken. De Laurentiis was never going to fire Stephen King. "I did it mostly to find out if it would work," King said. "People tell me they don't go to my movies anymore because they don't find me on screen. I thought, well, just once, let's go in and find out if it does carry over. I was intensely curious to find out if I could translate whatever was in my heart and brain, the stuff that's between the lines in the books, onto film."
And yet you could have easily hired a director that you respected as well. But you had to do it yourself, and I wondered why.
I got curious.
people would write letters, and sometimes what the letters said, they really started to flood in after The Shining. They ruined your book, or they would say, it wasn't what I expected, or it wasn't any good. But what they were all saying really seemed to boil down to, where the hell were you? You weren't there. And it's like, there's a spirit in writers' works, even though it's just print on the page. And sometimes the director gets that. I think that Milos Forman got it when he did One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. There's magic there, so that the heart of the writer is in two places. It's in that book and it's in that movie.
From the beginning, this was Stephen King. It was a Stephen King compilation of stories, a Stephen King screenplay, Stephen King directing, you know, his vision. And in that execution of it, he's the star. And so with that, he took his finger and I said, I'm going to scare you. That's what he wanted to do.
Dino promised that it would be made King's way, another promise which would soon be broken. In the Fangoria interview, King stated, I went in assuming that if somebody says, we're going to give you this, or this is what's going to happen, then it is going to happen, because when I promise somebody something, it happens. But that isn't always the way it works in the movies. Countless times have critics and writers taken out of context Stephen King's phrase, moron movie. He did not mean it to be derogatory at all. In the same article that this quote comes from, King says Maximum Overdrive is pretty scary. Continuing from the article, he said, I went in with the idea that I was going to make a moron movie. They're the best kind of movies as far as I'm concerned. Back to the Future is a moron movie. Rambo is a moron movie. I loved them both. I made a picture where people shoot at each other. There's some passable characterization, but I was more interested in pace than I was in character. I wanted to make entertainment.
There should be movies where you can sort of check your brains at the box office and pick them up 2 hours later. And yet, there are also moron movies, which are what I think of as perfect entertainment pictures, you know, where they hit that sublime note of idiocy that can be mistaken for social satire. I remember reading a long piece in the Village Voice about Dawn of the Dead, saying George Romero has created the perfect satire of a consumer society where people finally end up eating each other. And George just read that and laughed and said, gee, I thought it was a horror picture, you know. But every movie of this sort is a dream. Fantasies are dreams, and horror movies or suspense movies are nightmares. And this is about technology out of control. And I think technology is out of control on a large scale.
Any horror movie, no matter how stupid it really appears, is really telling you something. It may be unintentional on the part of the filmmakers, but the basic generic horror setup is really a morality play. It always is, and it always comes down to that. And you can watch it and come away with something, even though it was an unintentional message. And I think that's what fascinates me about horror. You know, what is it really about? It's about good and evil, one way or the other. There's a definition of horror. Let's say one is left-wing and one is right-wing. Liberal left-wing horror really is the evil is within us. You know, it's in our hearts. We are the evil ones. The right-wing horror is they're out there to get us. And both work. Both of those approaches work. And it seems to me that depending on how you apply that kind of two approaches to horror, you're really kind of examining people and situations.